here in Switzerland an economist. And actually, it's not a single week passing by without any big data scandal. Are the algorithms out of control? Is big tech out of control? What shall we do? It's high time to talk about digital responsibility. I'm glad that you're here, and actually I would love to start with a note from our wonderful host here, from Chairwoman of Ethos Services, from Beth Krasna. She's also the Vice President of the Federal Institutes of Technology, overseeing the finest educational institutes like ETH and EPFL of this country. Beth Krasna is this kind of hybrid person everyone wants to be right now. She's a chemical engineer holding an MBA from the MIT. The stage is yours, Beth.
Thank you, Patricia. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our conference and debate on corporate digital responsibility. We at Ethos believe that the digitalization of the economy and of society is one of the greatest societal challenges of the 21st century, on a par with social inequality and climate change. Change, especially disruptive change, needs a push to happen, and it is clear that confinement has brought some digitalization mainstream. I don't think I would have been quite so comfortable introducing a conference by video a year ago. The COVID sanitary crisis has been rightly called by some the great accelerator. In isolation, we have lived in digital enclaves and virtual reality worlds. We are all early adopters of digital technology now. The combination of better data, more powerful algorithms, and more computing power allows us to develop tools like facial recognition. Issues around how you get the data, who owns it, and how you use it are not yet resolved. The bias and prejudice built into data sets and algorithms are creating a general suspicion and lack of trust. People are asking for regulation and increased transparency of artificial intelligence and the right to audit the algorithm to see on what basis and with what biases the decisions are made. Just think of the progression. In 1997, IBM's Deep Blue, based on Bayesian structures, beat the chess champion Kasparov. This was explainable artificial intelligence. 14 years later, in 2011, IBM's Watson, basically an improved search engine with natural language processing and reasoning abilities, dominated a Jeopardy match. In 2017, AlphaGo, built on artificial neural networks, self-taught itself to play Go and beat the world Go champion. AlphaGo is a black box. Explainability is not baked into the design. If I believe what I read, 30% of companies are going to have artificial intelligence in their products in the next 2 years. The point here is that human issues cannot be afterthoughts. They need to be embedded into ethical frameworks in the design. Engineering is not enough. The parameters on human impact will be and must be set by society. Digital transformation has become essential to institutional success. But with so much data, so many systems now hosted in the cloud, cybersecurity has never been more critical. Companies and organizations need to safeguard their processes, software, and operating systems, and protect the data of their employees, customers, and suppliers. Companies need to be more transparent and responsible about how they navigate the digital issues that are at the same time ethical, legal, societal, environmental, financial, and in the end, reputational. We at Ethos consider that digital responsibility is part of good governance, and that responsible investors need to take this into consideration. So we are expanding our ESG criteria to include digital transparency and responsibility. The launch of our engagement paper today for our dialogue with companies, as well as this virtual event, marks the beginning of our ESG and digitalization initiative. Ethos' 7 expectations for digital responsibility are described in our engagement paper, which can be found on our website. They are: establish a public digital responsibility code, ensure transparency with stakeholders, comply with the highest standards of data processing and protection, establish ethical principles for artificial intelligence use, exclude sensitive activities related to the digital transition, ensure a fair and responsible social transition, and last but not least, help reduce the environmental footprint of digital technology. Our CEO, Vincent Kaufmann, will shortly be explaining these expectations. For this exciting virtual event, which is part of the Swiss Digital Days 2020, scheduled coincidentally and not deliberately on the day of the US elections, we are pleased to welcome some very interesting speakers and panelists. Paul-Olivier Dehaye will lead us through the Cambridge Analytica scandal, and Xavier Oberson will make a very strong case for the taxation of robots. Nicolas Passadelis will give us a practical example of the data ethics frameworks of Swisscom, and I am fairly certain that we will all enjoy the debate of our panelists, Cornelia Diethelm, Eva Thelisson, Nicolas Passadelis, and Jean-Henri Morin. So without further ado, I give the floor back to our moderator for this event, Patricia Larry. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, for these very strong opening words. We'll listen now to one of Europe's most famous mathematicians. He was lecturing at the ETH and University of Zurich, and he's also the co-founder of personaldata.io. That's a non-profit dedicated to help people gaining back their private data held by companies. Just 2 weeks ago, he made a move, he changed job. He's joining the contact tracing unit of Geneva Canton, and congratulations to that step, Olivier Dehaye. And you may remember the Cambridge Analytica scandal, I'm sure you remember it, and he became famous when he jointly investigated this case. The article he was working on argued that Cambridge Analytica, the company, was behind the successful online campaign of Donald Trump, as well as behind the successful Brexit campaign. It's the night of the night, it's the night of the election, and we are almost curious how this probably has changed. The situation has changed since 2016. We are very happy to meet him today. His personal data can be found on Twitter. So I strongly advise you to follow him on Twitter. He's a heavy Twitterer, far too much, as he says. Please, the stage is yours. Paul-Olivier Dehaye.
Well, thank you very much. I must insist that I'm talking here in my personal capacity, or as, oops, that's bad news. I'm fortunately ready for this. I'll switch to Firefox.
Is Google taking over your presentation?
Well, unfortunately, Google Chrome has some restrictions that mean that I can't display things, or Google has restrictions that mean that I can't display things as nicely on Firefox. So I have to use Google Chrome, but then it doesn't work. So can you see my screen?
We've seen it before. Now, I'm not sure if we lost it.
Yes?
Yes?
Yes, we see.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So I must say I'm talking in my personal capacity, or capacity as director of Personal.io, and not in my function that you mentioned. So today I would like to talk about the Cambridge Analytica scandal and some kind of history of it and the lessons that we might remember, more broadly than just the election taking place today, but generally with respect to corporate responsibility. So a quick review of the scandal, or at least my view of the scandal. So the whole thing really blew up because people were surprised that you could go from Facebook likes to psychographics. So let me explain that a little bit. around 2013, 2014, there was a research project started at Cambridge University to try to see if psychologists could predict psychology of people, to do psychometrics, measure the psychology of people based on their digital traces, their Facebook likes. So this was called the My Personality Project. And what they show is that it was actually possible to predict to some extent 5 main characteristics of, 5 main psychological characteristics of people which had been identified for a long time through validated psychology studies as very relevant. So that was the openness, the conscientiousness, the extraversion, agreeableness, or neuroticism of people, also called the Ocean Scale. And in scientific papers that were peer-reviewed and accepted for publication, they showed that actually you could predict those characteristics from Facebook likes. So for instance, in this chart, you can see that you can predict the average of those 5 traits. That's the red line, based on something like 90 to 100 likes, you can reach an accuracy of around 0.5. That doesn't mean very much, but it's essentially the accuracy of your family in trying to predict your psychology.
Paul-Olivier, I think you're not moving the slide.
Am I not moving the slide?
It's not moving. I was expecting it to move, but it's still the opening. It's the first slide.
Okay.
Maybe it was intended, but I don't think so.
No, thank you for telling me. Let me try again. So it will be very quickly.
Someone sabotaging your investigation.
Facebook is after you.
So does this work?
Yeah.
You see this?
Perfect.
And now you see it changes?
From likes to psychographics, it says.
Right. So the My Personality Project that I was just explaining, and then the Ocean model with openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. This led to some papers, and now we have this chart that essentially shows that with 100 likes, you can reach an accuracy that is very similar to the accuracy that a family member would predict. And if you're able to collect something like 300 likes on someone, you would have the accuracy of a spouse. It's quite important to understand that in the second part of that sentence, you would reach the accuracy of a spouse. That is done through validated psychological studies, filling forms and using calibrated forms and all of this. And you can reach the same level of accuracy instantly through digital trails, essentially. That was the main point of this research. Now, that's one thing. This was in 2013 or so. But what's the link with elections? Well, for the 2016 elections, some firms started offering services to political candidates to use this technology. So my own entry point was this article in December 2015 that was talking about Ted Cruz that had bought data and modeling services from this company called Cambridge Analytica to profile Facebook users in order to help with its targeting. I was already interested in data protection back then. I thought this was super interesting. I knew already of the psychological research that had been done. And I also noticed that this company was based in the UK, which opened the door to many quote-unquote opportunities. We'll get to that in a second. So I started investigating just as a citizen, and Cambridge University had a particular role in this, in partly helping and partly, I would say, covering up or hiding some of the actions of one of its employees, because one of its employees was playing a crucial role in quote-unquote weaponizing this research into the electoral sphere. It could be argued that he was doing this privately as a private enterprise. It's very doubtful, or it's very much questioned by many of his peers, how he got the initial data that he needed to do the modeling. Some of it might have come from academic research. So I started investigating that angle, and progressively, very quickly actually found that this company was completely open about most of what it was doing. So here you have a conference in September 2016, so just before the US election, where the CEO goes and talks to many heads of states, actually, telling them this is what we're doing. We're collecting all of this data, and we're profiling on all of those attributes, and we're helping Trump get elected, essentially. And he shows a very detailed view of what he could do, going down, to state-by-state statistics, but even to individual points on a map, telling about the profile, the psychological profile of that specific individual. Actually, if you zoom in on the slide, you can identify the individual. So that I thought was pretty shocking, that people were just listening there and not questioning whether that was a good thing to do or not. And it was even more shocking when you actually start digging even a bit more and you realize that this company was not just any company, was not just Cambridge Analytica offering commercial services, but was very tied to a company called SCL Group, which was a military company offering services in all kinds of countries that were essentially at war. It was offering services generally to Western powers to profile individuals on the field. So they had this method that they really have highly conceptualized of different steps that they can do to profile people to start influence them. And I will not go into the details, but the main point is this targeted audience analysis, this green hexagon in this, kind of PowerPoint hell of slides embedded into slides, but whatever. So they have this targeted audience analysis, and I think it's quite interesting to understand how that works. So the idea is that people will online, in particular, identify themselves. They will find cohesive social groups with shared cultures that they will try to join. So the offline analog is they will identify with their ethnic group, for instance. But the example that they give is around 2014, when talking at the House of Lords, is, well, if we want to profile Chinese people, we'll look at where they go online, and that will be helpful to start profiling them. And we can start understanding what behavior we can expect from them, what triggers exist, and how we can change it. And my main point here is that they had a very highly conceptualized view of what they could do. And they could define different intervention strategies. They could, if you are at war, you can offer cash in exchange for weapons. You can try to get some people to join a military service, a local militia you're trying to build. You can organize events to convince people to do certain things. And you can have dashboards. So they actually had dashboards where they tried to break down the population into different groups and different effects. For instance, anger at the prime minister, anger at troublemakers, view towards corruption or international stealing, their expectation of the future of their country, and things like that. And they were literally building dashboards of that. Now, you have to understand what data they collect in order to enter those dashboards. They literally have anthropologists going on the field, protected each with 20 Marines, to start asking questions and to try to inform the data that comes into those dashboards. So, and they even go and train NATO and different big international organizations on how to use those techniques. So that's SCL, that's the military arm, or the military sister, if you want, of Cambridge Analytica. So what does Cambridge Analytica do? Well, Cambridge Analytica does the same thing, but instead of sending paper propaganda, like this helicopter was doing, it's sending Kindles. That's the best analogy I can have. Kindles that will measure all these interactions and that will try to compute things about the reader as well. So they collect a ton of data from known data brokers, from consumer services, all kinds of consumer services, what people read, what people buy, what people watch, and also Facebook. And they interact with Facebook data, with Facebook distribution mechanisms to quickly do machine learning to try to predict things, to predict whether someone is a particular person on electoral rolls, to predict their probability of voting, ideological preferences, and their view towards issues. This is nothing new in US politics. This has happened for a long time. But because of the psychographics, they go a bit deeper. They also try to predict, as I said, those 5 different traits, but other things as well, like the need for cognition, the need for affect. So those are 2 scales, 2 additional scales, like that determine how much you need to think before you take a decision and how much you need to feel before you take a decision. Where you place a locus of control on your life, things like that. So they really try to understand the triggers, essentially, of people. And they define very carefully what they want to achieve. Maybe they want to achieve someone to buy a hat, a red hat, and there will be revenue for the campaign. Maybe they want someone to attend a meeting or to retweet something, to reshare some content. Maybe they want to provoke a reaction, like a comment, or provoke a Facebook reaction that they know will encourage Facebook to spread the post even further. And maybe they do all of these things by targeting very specific subgroups without letting other subgroups see it. So that's the so-called dark posts. So in a sense, what I'm trying to say is that a user on Facebook has some idea of what their interactions are. That's the bottom left box. A user knows that they can be participating in a chat group. They might do a post, might do a like, might do a comment. But then there is this whole other landscape of tools that are used by advertisers to try to understand what this user is and how they could be influenced. And the main tool for that is called a custom audience. It's basically lists of people that you try to influence in the same way. And from those custom audiences, you can build further audiences. You can tell Facebook, hey, this is a seed of 100 people I have, and I care very much about them. No need to tell you why, but this is a seed of people that I feel are pretty homogeneous. Now find me 1,000 like them, using all the data you have. And at that stage, it's very interesting because data flows from other contexts into this big profiling machine to be used by the initial actor, right? So you could have this commercial data that has been collected by Facebook, maybe offering services to this big commercial company, that suddenly this data is used to profile for the benefit of another actor, right? So Facebook is very promiscuous in the way it shares information between different customers. Maybe not directly, but by building it would not be in their interest to do it directly, but by building services on top of this data that would benefit a variety of their clients. And using this, the Trump campaign has optimized a huge amount of targeting of ads, 1,000 variations per day at the peak. One thing that's very important to understand is that there is very little thinking behind the targeting of these messages, little thinking by humans. It's all done by systems that are learning automatically. And this was part of a feature or an effect of the way the Trump campaign was built. It was a very slim campaign. So you can have someone with a big bank account deciding criteria that would then determine the targeting of thousands or hundreds of thousands of messages. Right? And this creates a very important feedback loop between custom audiences that are paid and intentional, lookalike audiences that are also paid and intentional, and then organic content that just spreads much more virally and is actually free to the campaign. And it's in part accidental because you can also work to create that. Right? So the idea is to create small publics, box individuals into them, and then iteratively construct virality from those seeds. And accelerate this effect through emotional content. So for those who know about Facebook and the way it works, you've seen in the past listicles or clickbait or reactions-driven posts that just had enormous propagation. So what can users do? They can fight back. They can try to understand better what a company like Cambridge Analytica was doing. So I built a little guide to help people ask for their data because this company was British, so subject to UK laws, European laws. This gave the rights to individuals to get their data. And they can get some proofs of what was actually done. And I think this was a huge effect in elevating the debate further into, okay, they are doing all of this. Is this okay? Is it not okay? Instead of having abstract discussions about what these companies are doing. This became a movie that some of you might have seen, The Great Hack. This is the back of David Carroll, whom I helped get his data back from Cambridge Analytica. And we can also push for more transparency in general, transparency about how Facebook targets its ads. So how it uses custom audiences, all of those very, how to say, grainy or dark tools of transparency that no one cares about, but actually some people do care about it. Journalists who are experts, individuals who are experts, and they can leverage those tools to help explain to the general public better how it works and what the dangers are. To the extent that this was actually part of some of the follow-up questions to Mark Zuckerberg by Senator Blumenthal, when Zuckerberg had to testify to Congress, he's basically lied about the completeness of those transparency tools, which led to follow-up questions by senators that were trying to pin them down. So I'll finish very quickly with a high-level view of what I'm trying to say. I'll rely on biology and on evolution and on cells, on this idea that a body has many cells, and many of us are used or have thought at some point about this mass of cells as an organism at large. But you can also think about bodies or brains. So if you think about brains interacting with an environment, it might be Facebook that it's interacting with. But you can also think now about bodies interacting with society with a virus that is spreading on the right through different individuals. So what do I mean here? I mean that I have a cell that is interacting with an environment that has different components like A and B. The cell knows about its interactions with A and its interactions with B. It doesn't necessarily know how A and B interact. But when A and B get very coupled, they are very tight together, there is a lot of what A does that is determined by what B does. The cell is interacting with an environment at large that it just doesn't understand anymore. It doesn't exactly know what this environment is doing to them. So it progressively becomes locked in this interaction, in being dependent on this environment. It loses any kind of evolutionary advantage, because if A and B start changing behavior, because whatever is driving their behavior is itself changing behavior, the cell is very dependent on this relationship. And I think this is a big danger, and we can see it in many different contexts now. We can see it with our brains that is fed misinformation. Well, first of all, we understand it with cells. We understand that too much dependency on the environment can lead to danger. If suddenly the environment changed, a whole species could die. Without being as extreme, maybe, we can understand that if all brains depend on just a few actors to get their information, we have serious problems in our thinking collectively. And now we can start to see as well that if we have a virus that spreads in society without real understanding of how that happens, it can lead to danger for all of us individually and collectively as well. So thank you. That's the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, Paul-Olivier, Dehaye. Thank you for giving us some background about this big data nightmare we've all remember very well. So, dear audience, we actually like to take your questions now and are very interested in your questions. Actually, the CEO of Ethos, Vincent Kaufmann, bienvenue, et bonjour, will help me to monitor all these questions. And actually, I want to ask you maybe the first questions. I've already raised it. What do you think? How many of this psychological targeting is going on behind the scenes during this election period 2020?
Well, it's very difficult. It's not necessarily that there is psychological targeting that is done explicitly, but as more and more data is fed into this ecosystem that is based on psychological profiling, then yes, over time it leads to this ecosystem eventually targeting also people based on those characteristics, right? So if in some what I'm trying to say, if in some table there is your psychological profile, and that data is being fed into this massive ecosystem of profiling, if that data is useful to profile you, then that data will start being reused elsewhere.
So, but now both parties are using it excessively, or what do you think?
I do not necessarily do that. What I do know is that and I'll take the question there at the same time. So there is a bunch of companies that are emerging whose ethics you can heavily question, that are essentially intentionally using outrage or provocation or things like this to generate circulation of information, accrued organic content circulation, to create viral content essentially. So they've very well understood that this ecosystem of information it has some levers, and they are trying to exploit it. Now, I'm saying this because I suspect from the capitalization of the question that one of those companies' employees is asking the first question there as anonymous attendee.
Okay, and let's see what's going on the question side.
So Paul-Olivier answers the first question, and I think it's quite accurate. We will have some votation at the end of the month, quite debated. Especially the responsible business initiative, and those first question was also, how far do you think those Swiss companies or Swiss citizens are also influenced on their vote? So you
without addressing the company part of this question, which is hidden again, as I insist. So one thing that I would very much look at is, how can you split the electorate? How can you generate anger, outrage, reactions from people, right? You're not trying to sell toothpaste, you're trying to sell a political message, which means there is an opportunity for people to reshare your content on social networks. They'll never reshare a toothpaste ad, but they might reshare something for a political initiative. So how do you tap into this anger, this emotion, all of those things? And the best way people have so far, because of social network, is to split people apart. So what splits Swiss society? That's the main question. And there are obvious things. I mean, French against Germans, for instance, that's pretty obvious. But if you dig a bit deeper, there is many other things. There is, right now, in the context of the COVID-19, there is going to be things like the reaction of the authorities to the crisis, the vaccines and things like this. Or there is going to be wealth. There is huge discrepancy in wealth in Switzerland. There's people who work extremely hard and barely make a living, and then there are others who are insanely wealthy. So those are borders that you can use to split people and generate discussions online, which means basically that your message crowds everyone else's.
So, and obviously also Swiss people are influenced, Swiss voters are influenced by this kind of companies. Or is it more like an Anglo-Saxon phenomenon?
No, I think we all use the same social networks globally. Mm-hmm. So it's if a certain campaign who tries to play it the old way has to pay 10 times more for each message to circulate, there's nothing Swiss about that question. It's just the fact that it's harder to reach voters if your message does not travel organically, like maybe the competing campaign's message, right? So that's the crucial element, is this amplification that comes from social networks. And then some campaigns decide to tap into it, and I wouldn't give it very long before it becomes very prevalent here as well.
And it's not regulated?
Well, in Switzerland, there's actually very little in the political sphere that is regulated. But yes, this is a global problem. This advertising, this targeting, the pricing, all of that is very much unregulated. There is, in the US, they have laws about the pricing of electoral messages for different candidates in the same election. It has to be the same, it has to be the lowest that is paid by any marketer. Online, they do whatever they want. I mean, there was just an article showing that Trump paid far less than Biden for a while for his ads, and we don't really know why, and there's actually good arguments why it shouldn't be all the same.
So it's really not very transparent. Do we have any further questions?
We have some questions. The first one was really looking at nothing surprising to use data for commercial reason for company or political reason for political parties. And the question was, how far should we regulate that? The question was in French from Isoza. So the question, you tackle it a little bit on how far should we regulate those things, and I think you touch base on it.
My view is actually we should heavily regulate the transparency, so we have a very effective transparency on what happens. And then that transparency will generate a public debate, which will contribute to creating norms on what is acceptable and what is not. And those norms will basically create no barriers to doing more.
And I got also from Tobias quite an interesting question on how should developers of AI best limit the potential misuse of their products by the clients. Transparency and built-in security does not work for every use case, for example, law enforcement.
Well, that's a very hard question, obviously. So you're building tools. You can't really determine how the tools will be used. The best answer I have is that if you're building such type of tools, you're probably making quite a bit of money. Make sure that you maybe work only part-time and you dedicate some part of your time to preventing misuse of those tools through some other means than building technology, or you donate some of this money elsewhere. But there is very little you can actually do technology-wise to limit the use of those tools. Maybe you could lobby for regulations.
Thank you. A comment, more general comment. There is a gap between the law and regulatory, and those tech companies are surfing on the weakness. I think we touch bits, more comment. You tend to agree on this. What is really, so Serge Zagbo, what is really important to catch up and protect more our data?
What can we do to catch up
and protect more our data? Maybe as a user or?
As a user, I think this is this is always the way the question is framed, and I think it's hopeless as long as we frame the question this way. We should demand change collectively. We should demand that stronger laws. We should demand that those laws actually be applied. We should challenge the practices of companies that are trying to skirt the law, and we should definitely challenge the companies that are breaking the law. So all of those things are looking for systemic effect rather than individual self-protecting effect. One very important aspect of all this is the group privacy element. You can hide yourself all you want. If your wife doesn't, if your neighbor doesn't, then the prediction ability is still pretty high on your own characteristics.
And maybe you recommend to users to have anonymized background at Zoom, to not give away any personal data, as you've chosen a black background. Is it that's your point? Looks a bit like you're broadcasting out of darknet.
No, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, I'm at home like most people, except maybe you, and I just hastily arranged office. I don't necessarily want to show the back.
And is it the reason because it's black or white?
And praying for a baby not to appear behind me as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think
we have to move, and maybe we will take some question afterward. One concerning Swisscom. Maybe Mr. Passadelis will answer later from Ethos. Otherwise, we have to move. We have very good question, but I think we have to move to Mr. Oberson now.
Yeah, merci beaucoup, Vincent, and merci beaucoup, Paul-Olivier. Yeah, that was very interesting, and actually it's a pity that we can run out of time already because there are lots of questions. Thank you for your questions that you're interested. We move on with Xavier Oberson, and he's professor and lawyer. He's professor of tax law, and he actually gained widespread attention when he published a series of articles and conferences about the taxation of robots. And of course, we are most curious what this is all about. So the stage is yours, Xavier Oberson.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, so we just try to bring my slides.
You've chosen not an anonymous background, so you are art lover.
Okay. I will think. Yeah. Do you see my slide now? Or?
Not yet, but we see your pieces of art. So that's nice, actually. The background, now it's coming? Yes, perfect.
Yeah, you see it now? Okay, so.
Maybe make them full screen.
Yes, exactly. So, voila. It's okay like that?
Perfect.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, yes, I will just try to describe a little bit this concept about taxing robots. So basically, and I think it's quite interesting. Following also what was discussed before, because so far when we think about robots, we have this kind of anthropomorphic view of an industrial robot building a machine or building cars, as it is right now. It's already very well developed and used. For example, now a car is done almost, I would say, by 80% done by automation. Shoes, I mean, many goods are already, and for years sometimes, done and finalized by robots. The problematic aspect is that robots now, and when I speak about robots, I tend to use, as you will see, a broad definition of that, and we can come back to this, is that robot and artificial intelligence is used more and more in the service economy. We have doctors, you have the Da Vinci, for example, robot which can help surgeons. You have bankers, you have lawyers even using robot. The famous Ross, you know, Ross is a robot helping a lawyer to make legal research. And by the way, it's a bit ironic because the specialty of Ross is bankruptcy law. So I hope there's no hidden agenda behind this. Of course, this is a bit humoristic, what I try to say here. Administration is using robots. In Japan, we already have some robots helping people to fill their tax return, for example, agriculture, etc. So this is well known, and this situation, of course, is increasing And frankly speaking, the COVID, as Beth Krasna was saying also previously, tend to even increase this trend because companies are getting kind of incentive to use more automation because of the disease, of course. So this is not as such a bad news because there's a lot of very I would say effective and good aspect of using robots. For example, in Fukushima, we are using robots to verify the level of toxicity and of the water. Also robots are used as to replace sometimes very boring, very dangerous, very repetitive tasks. So I'm not against robots as such, but still the implication and the impact of this widespread use is really a matter of controversy. So, I mean, in summary, I can say there are basically two different schools of thought among economists in particular about the impact of artificial intelligence. In rough summary, I can say you have the optimist on the one side and you have the pessimist on the other side. So the optimists, they say, well, this is the fourth industrial revolution. We already have had 3 revolutions in the past. At the end of the day, the economy was better off. And this is a kind of a Schumpeter perspective, the so-called destructive creation. In other words, many jobs will, of course, disappear because of automation, but new jobs, and even much more new jobs, will be created. So at the end of the day, the economy and the growth will be much better. So this is the optimist. Of course, on the other hand, you have the pessimist. So the pessimists, they say, well, the famous sentence is the following. They say, this time it is different. And why this time is different? Because we are talking about artificial intelligence, and this machine, this computer, eventually will not only be able to replace the brains of people, but could even be even smarter than the people. And if this is the case, well, we have a big problem. So, frankly, I'm taking a very humble position here. I cannot pretend, and I don't think I'm competent enough to say who is right between the optimist and the pessimist. But the problem is that there are very good arguments also in favor of the pessimist view. And the problem is that if they are right, we have a big problem. And from a tax standpoint, I can say we have a triple negative effect. The first effect, of course, is that the labor as such, human labor, could shrink or could even disappear eventually. So if labor disappears, the income tax will shrink at the same time. And this is a big problem because for most states, like for example in the United States, the biggest source of revenue comes from the income tax. And in many states, this is the case. The second problem is that the social security is financed by the income also of labor, in a sense. And this problem will be, in fact, compounded by the fact that since people are losing their job, they will require additional financial needs from the social security. So the impact will be even bigger than just reducement of income. And the last one, the third impact, is the loss of consumption at the same time. Because if people lose their job, they have less income, they can consume less, and the consumption can really put the economy in big trouble, not to mention the value-added tax, which is a consumption tax, which is also the result of consumption. And for most countries, especially European countries, the value-added tax, like in Switzerland as well, is the biggest source of income by far. So, again, I'm not saying we should follow the pessimist. What I'm just saying is that we don't know who is right, but there are very strong arguments that at least there will be a problem. And at least, this is my personal view, I think that many workers will maybe not be able, at least, to find a proper additional job or a new job in the new economy, and that they will really lose any kind of possibility to work. In addition, and it was mentioned also before, the automation as an effect to increase the inequality in the economy. Especially the people that eventually will control the intellectual property, the robotics, the artificial intelligence, will get more and more control over the economy in the detriment of the others. So when you know that there's a very big risk from a financial standpoint, we need to find a solution, and we need to find the solution very quickly, I think, because as you know, in the tax world, when you want to introduce a new system of taxation, it takes a very long time. And if you look at what is going on at the OECD, there's this discussion right now on the taxation of the digital economy. They are trying to find a consensus, and they were hoping to get that consensus last October, actually, and they didn't succeed. And now they are postponing the discussion for at least 6 months. So we need to think about a solution to that problem right now. And one alternative, I believe, could be a taxation of robots. So how do you implement this kind of system? How can it work? What is interesting is that in parallel to this kind of analysis of the impact of artificial intelligence, especially on the job market, there's been some thoughts, notably at the EU level, on maybe creating, I think this is a bit provocative, but still, on creating some kind of a new legal person. So this is not science fiction, this is the EU Parliament, which is considering this idea right now. When you think about it, this is not so incredible, because 1 century ago, we didn't have the concept of a legal entity. For example, a corporation. What is a corporation? Like Google, Apple, we're talking about, or Nestle, or Swisscom. What is a corporation? It's not a person. It's not somebody with whom you can shake hands. It's just a pure legal concept. It's a legal fiction that was created by the Parliament 1 century ago, and quite interestingly, almost at the same time, especially it started in the UK and in the United States after 2 Supreme Court judgments of the end of the pre-last century. So now we are thinking about that maybe we should consider creating a new person, some kind of electronic entity, which will need to be defined, and also with a view maybe to grant this person some legal right, but of course some legal obligation. And a part of this obligation could also be a tax. Now, in order to introduce a new tax, you need a justification, of course. And you need a justification from an economic perspective, and you need a justification from a constitutional perspective. And this is the most difficult part of this analysis, I would say. Okay, so from the economic perspective, how can you justify a tax on robots as such? It's interesting that Switzerland, we are a bit at the front of this discussion around the world. And maybe one of the reasons, I don't know, is because we have a strange tax in Switzerland, which is the tax on imputed income of owners, valeur locative in French. So you know, in Switzerland, if you own a house, it's a bit disputed, but this is the case right now. You are supposed to pay a tax, an income tax, on the rent that you should have paid if you wanted to live in this house. It has been regarded as constitutional by the Supreme Court already a decade ago. You can make a kind of similar case, I would say, for a robot tax. You could say the following. You have an enterprise. The enterprise is using a robot instead of humans. So it, in a way, it doesn't have to pay the salary in the similar analogic fashion as an owner having to pay a rent, a theoretical rent, in order to live in this house. So in other words, under this perspective, a robot tax could be regarded as some kind of imputed income that an enterprise would be required to pay if, for I would say, analogous or comparable human doing the same kind of job. That could be one approach. Another perspective, which has been developed by some economists in the United States, is to say some kind of neutrality principle between humans and robot workers. So this is one possibility. Now we get even a bit more abstract. I'm sorry, but then it gets more concrete, I would say. The problem we have is a constitutional problem, because in order to justify a new tax, you need to follow what we call, in constitutional law, the ability to pay principle. So a tax should correspond to your ability to pay, as a legal person or as an individual. The problem is that right now, a robot as such has no ability to pay. It does not even exist. It has no money to pay the tax. So this is why, personally, I proposed, and I'm defending the concept of having a taxation of robots in two different phases. The first phase would be to tax not the robot as such, because it has no ability to pay, but to tax the use of robots. But in a second stage, we can even imagine in the future that if some kind of legal personality, like the EU is analyzing, is granted to a robot, then we could even consider a tax on robots as such. So I don't want to spend so much time, just to show a little bit of a concept that could be implemented following these two stages. So you see, for example, some solution could be to introduce taxation of enterprise, so the profit from the use of robots. You could have this concept of an imputed salary, so some kind of theoretical salary that could be applied to enterprise using robots. You have the South Korean approach, which has been sometimes described as the first robot tax. In a way, they reduced the deduction in favor of robotics. You have also some ideas about introducing some automation taxes based on some kind of ratio of human workers vis-à-vis robot workers. And this is a former Nobel Prize economist who suggested to have some kind of transitory tax to help to adjust to the new economy, which would be what we call a Pigouvian tax. So this is a tax taxing in some kind of a bit like a pollution tax, so a tax that would tax for little while and help the economy to adjust to the new economy. The second approach, the second phase is a much more, I would say, revolutionary approach, which would to tax a robot as such, but we are not ready for that yet. We need some legal personality granted to robots. And the last point I want to make is that we could very well use the value-added tax. I think the value-added tax could be a very good system to introduce a robot tax. And in a provocative way, I can even demonstrate to you that, in fact, the value-added tax already taxes the robot, actually, already. When a lawyer, for example, is giving you a legal opinion, and he or she has used ROS, the computer ROS, to help the research in his legal bill, it will include the value-added tax, which will in fact include some part of the cost involved by the robots. You can also think about adjusting the social security system in a similar fashion as I've described for the income tax, in a way to try to cover the cost for the social security. But there are also some alternative approach to increase the tax on capital, or increase profit tax on companies. But in my view, these are just alternatives. This does not really correspond to a concept of a robot tax as such. Just to, as a conclusion, so I think we should really study carefully this robot tax. Since I'm starting this time of kind of conferences, there are researchers all over the world now really focusing on that. Also many in China and in Asia, actually. But I think we need a global approach. It doesn't make any sense to me, for example, that Switzerland would introduce alone a robot tax, because this could create a big competitive and problematic consequence. But we should really, I think, consider that, because otherwise, when the problem will really emerge, it could be too late to implement properly and in due time such kind of taxation. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Xavier Oberson. And dear audience, dear viewers, we're happy to take your questions now. And Xavier, just from my side, but as I understand, this concept and framework, this is really very, very early stage now in the discussion.
Yes, yeah, exactly. To my knowledge, I'm sorry, I'm trying to take away this
presentation slides.
Presentation, yes. Yeah. So this concept now is just studied. Frankly speaking, there are no real robot tax which really exist in the world.
There is no proof of concept yet. Maybe Estonia may be coming, but there is so far no POC.
Absolutely. Yeah. I can just show you some example which exist in California. Apparently, they already introduced some taxes on drones and taxes on self-driving cars. But this is a very old concept of tax. It's like a tax on dogs, you know, a tax on cars. My approach is really a much more, I would say, modern view of a taxation of, in a way, looking at robots or artificial intelligence like a human being, or the impact of the artificial intelligence on the economy as such.
And the definition of robots, what is AI, what is robots? It's very easy to imagine it in an industrial context. You see them working, the robots. But of course, just concerning the algorithms of Facebook or networks, I mean, how many robots do they have? And how do you, I mean, I think there is really difficult to define that even.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the main critics of this concept of taxation of robots, is the difficulty to define a robot. I completely agree. But personally, I think we should get some kind of form-neutral definition of the robot. So, because of course, if you say, I'm just taxing a robot which is walking on the street, then the artificial intelligence can do the same in a computer, which would be in Monaco, for example, to be a bit provocative. So I think we should focus on the impact on the artificial intelligence, on the economy. In a similar fashion that what the OECD is now looking at for the digital economy. We are also trying to figure out ways to tax the digital economy at the place where the user are located, at the place where the consumer are located. I think we should analyze a robot tax in a similar way.
And are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. I think the audience is reacting a lot to your quite provocative questions. The first one, I think, was just answered. It was a provocative question: what is a robot? And asking an Excel formula is a robot. Should we tax Excel formula? I think you answered that quite well. We should look at the impact. I think it was quite provocative, but a good question, I guess. And you agree on how difficult it is to define what a robot is, and the basis of impact, I think, is quite relevant to answer this question. I go to other provocative question, which I think are also quite central to the topic. If robots produce income, why should there be such an issue? Maybe it rather boils down to an equality issue than a problem of tax mode. From Guillaume.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Some people are saying in a similar way, saying we have the corporation profit tax, and the corporation as the robots, for example, as tools. So we tax the profit of the company. Why do we tax robots? I understand this argument. But the problem is that, yes, we have the profit tax, but if you look around the world, the profit tax is just shrinking everywhere. We are reducing the profit tax everywhere in the world. And it's not sufficient because we don't tax then anymore the labor. And the labor is the base of the social security. And the labor is the base of, is one of the most important source of income for the state. So it's not enough. I mean, you need to include in the tax base the labor. This is the problem. And the labor could disappear because of robotics. So my approach is to say we can find some kind of way to evaluate the importance of such labor done by a robot, and then we can tax it. And the next criticism following this question would be to say, but aren't you creating a double taxation then with this robot tax? And my answer is no. The idea is not to add a new tax with all the other tax existing. My concept, which would of course need much more time to describe, is to review completely the tax system with the approach of a robot tax. And then we can also avoid double taxation, economic double taxation, and we have a lot of tools to do that. We already do that, for example, for dividends and profits of companies.
I'm sure there's more questions.
I think some were going in the same direction, and there is one which I liked. I don't find it anymore, but was more on Ethos. I'm still wondering why we consider taxing robots instead of taxing the data flow and transaction, which is where lies the value. And robots are not an entity, so what are you going to tax? The user, the buyer, the developer, the editor, the distributor? And I would complete on that, maybe to have your view on a project which is currently discussed, potentially an initiative in Switzerland to the micro tax, to tax exactly those micro financial transactions from which is currently a plan. I don't know if you think both tax would be competitive or complementary, or should we privilege taxing transaction or taxing robo?
There's actually even another idea coming up that we have to tax e-commerce, online shopping as well. So it's a lot about tax justice right now.
Yeah.
It's really a hot topic.
But yes, that's a very good question, I think. Personally, I think a tax system has to be fair. And in order for a tax system to be fair, it should tax, I would say, almost everything, but not too much. So people should be able to develop their capacities, to invest, to do some research and development, innovation, but we should try to tax more or less every aspect. In other words, we can tax income, then we can tax the wealth when you keep the income. When you spend your money, you can tax the consumption. That's a fair tax system, okay? Now, the problem of that is that I agree, maybe we can tax the data. That's an interesting alternative. But I don't believe of the single tax approach. You know, say, oh, we are bringing a new tax. It's so fantastic that it will replace all the existing taxes. And this, I don't believe in that. Plus, I think it's not fair because some people will work, some people will have income from their capital, some people will have consumption. We should tax all of them in a fair and equitable way. And if you take this micro tax, it's not a bad, it's a good idea. I'm not against it. But first, I don't think it will replace all the others. And even I don't think it should. I don't think it should. And this tax also has a problem of territoriality, because let's say it's a tax on payments, as I understand the concept. But well, okay, you do the payment outside of Switzerland, and then you avoid the tax.
Yeah.
So
this is again the global framework.
I think the global approach.
Yeah.
This is my personal view.
Yeah, exactly. So
Excellent. We have a lot of questions and a lot of interest. I would advise the audience to buy your book, which was initially made in English, and I think it was recently translated in French. And I guess you develop all this concept in your book. So for the people who have many questions, have a look at Xavier Oberson's book, and certainly we'll be also happy to answer your question in a bilateral way. I think we need to move now.
Yeah, we're running out of time, and there are lots of speakers lining up and to say something. And also, we are very curious and interested in the approach of Ethos themselves. They want to boost digital responsibility, and they have created an own approach, a code of conduct, and Vincent Kaufmann is actually representing 225 members and investors like pension funds, and they're managing 260 billion francs in a sustainable and in an ethical way. And he is actually also very well known as a speaker and a feared speaker during the general assemblies of big corporates. And I'm very curious what he's going to present us now.
Thank you very much, Patricia, also for your great moderation, and to all panelists. And really, I think the debate we had until now, or the question and the presentation, really give a further purpose to the engagement paper we have published this morning. It's been a while we are discussing at Ethos, and also some of our member pension funds are asking us also to engage a constructive dialogue with companies and Swiss companies also on the question of digitalization, maybe first on the data protection side, but we have quickly noticed that it's not only about data protection, it's a broad topic. So we have worked on what we call an engagement paper, and we've come up with actually 7 expectations that what we just present you, and I guess that could be also an opening for the debate we will have, and I'm looking also forward to have the discussion with Mr. Passadelis representing Swisscom, because I guess those expectations are typically addressed to that kind of companies. So there was also the question about legislation about those topics or self-regulation. Ethos will push for more self-regulation on corporation. That's what we have always done with those engagement programs we are running. So just as Patricia said, why do we tackle this issue now? Ethos has always been working on what we call ESG, environmental, social, and governance issue, analyzing companies and the practices of companies on these ESG issues. And more, we believe that there is an additional letter which should come, which would be the D, environmental, social, governance, and digitalization, because it becomes at the heart of ethical consideration for investors and, of course, for companies. So about the issues, we spoke a lot, I think, with Paul-Olivier about the data protection issues. There is not a single day without a scandal. And about the Cambridge Analytica, it was recently published that Facebook will be sued. And Facebook being one of the largest companies worldwide, Facebook is a company which is in almost every portfolio of every Swiss pension fund. So you, as a pensionee of those pension funds, you are an indirect shareholder of Facebook, so you indirectly face high risk. There is not only a question about US and GAFAM company. I guess we have in Switzerland large pharma companies, and data for a pharma company such as Novartis is key. So how is Novartis treating those data? How is Novartis using currently artificial intelligence to develop good medicine, but how far they should use this technology without considering some ethical issues behind that? The banks, we have a strong banks industry, and of course their data is key, and there is also a big question in the future for the jobs in Switzerland about those jobs being replaced by potentially algorithms and other artificial intelligence models. And Swisscom, we will speak about it. Of course, data breach, which also was in the headlines. So cybersecurity is also a key topic for big corporations such as Swisscom. It's not the only issues, of course, because data protection is more and more regulated with the European Union or the recent development in Switzerland. There is also all about the ethical impact of artificial intelligence, being the development of the kind of autonomous weapon. It was a big scandal with Google, and Google employees actually mobilized a couple of years ago against their own company and pushed the company to really adopt new ethical artificial intelligence ethical principle. And now they decided to avoid being active in the development of algorithms which would push this kind of weapons. The insurance industry is working hard also on developing algorithms which would be able to decide on the risk of the client, and typically there could be some high ethical issues if the data they are using are not that correct or come to wrong decision of artificial intelligence. We spoke about DeepMind. Now we come more and more with deep learning and AI, which is actually not explainable anymore and which bring a big ethical debate. Even traditional industry like ABB are working hard on developing AI, typically on the grid system. And so I guess it's not only about the GAFAM of this world, the large US companies. We believe it does concern all companies in the world, and our Swiss-listed company are typically also concerned by those cases. The COVID situation, we spoke about that, and it does actually accelerate all these topics, and a recent from actually yesterday mentioning that the COVID has pushed the pharma industry really to work harder on the AI issues. AI, data protection, and of course, social impact. We discussed this, I think, with Xavier Oberson, and we are actually adopting on the ability of this fourth revolution to be able to create more jobs as it will destroy. We will see it in the banking industry. We will see it in many fields. And it's not yet sure whether we will be able to have a net workforce creation with this revolution. So, and not only about job loss, the question is also about our social model. We are in Switzerland very keen on our, I think, quite a well-balanced social scheme with pension fund. But what if we lose many of the jobs? Who will pay in the future those retirement schemes? And that's a big question. And typically, business model like Uber, which was really trying not to have employees, but entrepreneur or independent employee are really at the limit of what our society can bear. And again, with the current pandemic, I guess many companies are working also to replace some of the job with AI and certainly accelerating the process. All these issues actually are defined in our paper and brought us to come up with 7 expectations that we will discuss with the company in which we invest. The first idea we will discuss with those companies, we would like them to establish what we will call a digital responsibility code. This code should tackle some of the significant issues. We would also expect companies to be transparent on how they are using AI, on how they are using the data of their consumers and clients and employees potentially. We would like to ask companies to comply with the highest standard on data protection. So again, about self-regulation, the RGPD in EU seems to be currently the highest level, the highest standard. So we would like companies to embrace such high-level expectation. Specifically on companies who are wanting to use AI, we believe they should have an ethical discussion about how far they want to go with AI and have specific AI principle, ethical principle. Then, of course, there is a big new development of of business activities which we would consider sensitive. I will come back on it, and we think companies should prevent or should exclude some of those activities or avoid selling technologies to clients which will use then those technologies to sensitive activities. And then we would expect companies to ensure a fair and responsible social transition, and then also to mitigate the environmental impact of their devices, but also of all the data they are using. So that would be about the 7 expectations. I will just dig into 3 of those expectations to maybe give some food for the debate later on, because I guess our panelists will have something to say about that. On the code of conduct, on the corporate digital responsibility code of conduct, we expect that the company really covers the main issues they are facing, starting with the governance of the digital risk and opportunities. Of course, digitalization is often an opportunity, but has some kind of risk. So who is responsible in the company should be the board of directors who tackles those issues. We also expect management to have a dedicated person, a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, or Chief Data Officer, depending on how the issue is important. We believe companies should really monitor technology, not only to make their business model evolve, but also to anticipate the transition they will face and to anticipate a couple of years ahead on what kind of job they will need in the future, and to be able to accompany their employees toward a transition. And this very technologic, what we would call that, could potentially really help company promote their employees and make them actually training to adapt their challenges. We expect those code of conduct to be transparent, available on the website, and that the company actually report in their sustainability reporting how they make sure that those principles are enforced. On the expectation 4, which is about establishing an ethical principle for AI use, what we would expect from company is really to develop AI with the goal to have a positive impact on environment and the planet, and of course also social, because we believe AI can help to tackle some of the largest challenge, being climate change, being the health problems, the pandemic we currently live. But then, if those AI is developed with not this goal, we believe the company should potentially refrain from that. Ensure equal treatment and non-discrimination for the AI companies, AI companies, what they develop and use. And that's a big debate we also had. Some AI tends to put people in a bubble, depend on how the data quality, the data set quality is. The result of algorithms could have strong bias. So those bias should be avoided by those companies. AI should remain explainable. We think this is quite a condition, and to ensure there is also always a human in the loop process to ensure this AI is always explainable. And ensure that the development of AI is responsible, safe, and useful, and that machine retains tool status, and not that they become responsible for their decision. At the end of the day, it's still the company owning the AI or the IP who should be responsible for them. On the sensitive digital activities, we would like companies to avoid or avoiding that the technology are used in such activities, typically a tracking system that would infringe fundamental rights, human rights, freedom of expression. That's the kind of technology companies should not be developing. System which limit, reduce freedom of expression. Of course, system designed to create addiction. I guess it's far more spread as we believed. We even see with smartphones which are actually designed to create those kind of addiction. So this is really, we believe, an issue, especially for younger generation. Autonomous weapon, we believe that should be clearly excluded. And system serving to manipulate a market or influence the behavior of a market or population. I think Paul-Olivier covered this. We believe that companies should not embrace such activities. I will just finish, I guess, with the fair and responsible social transition. We believe some companies have a responsibility to actually accompany their employees, help them to plan the skills, and really allow some training programs and accompany those employees with this transition. And I will finish also that the new business models that are enabled by technology, being the Uber system, being the Airbnb or those kind of new service economy, should also clearly be constructed and to keep those social obligations to employees, and should not be used actually to circumvent collective arrangement or social security system, because I think that was kind of a development we lived in the past. I will conclude with it. I guess there is some debate, some potential debate for the panel, and maybe for Mr. Passadelis to react on some of those expectations.
Merci beaucoup, Vincent Kaufmann. Actually, 7 great expectations. Let's see how the corporate world is reacting on that. We have a representative of the blue giant ICT company Swisscom here. I mean, of course, Swisscom is more data-driven than a lot of other Swiss companies. The head of data governance, Nicolas Passadelis, is online here. We e-meet him as well. And he actually created ethics boards lately and is overwhelmed now by other companies. They're really interested in their case, what they are doing, and he will share some experiences about that. And actually, Nicolas, how are you holding up with the new corona challenges and feeding the government with our mobility profiles now?
Thank you. I'd like to take your question to the panel maybe afterwards, because I've just got 10 minutes for my presentation, which actually now I had to go to change on the iPad because Zoom is blocked on our network now. Maybe could I ask Sebastian to share for me, please?
Let's see if we can share the slides of Nicolas Passadelis. There is something going on. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
So thank you very much again. It's a pleasure to be with you today, even on this rather modest way online. So I'd like to introduce you really quickly to our data ethics framework. We've been running now for almost a year. In fact, we started in November 2019. And I will share with you the way we approached it and give you a very brief insight on the first experience we had. I think we heard it very convincingly by Jean-Olivier that there is some sort of anxiety or feeling uncomfortable about what digitalization does to us as a human being, but also to us as a society. And I can see there are 4 issues which at least pop into my eye quite frequently. We very well heard about the radicalization of society, how the digital technology has managed to bring gaps into society and to radicalize certain groups or people. But then we also heard about manipulation about how people are led to believe something which is not true, or to follow a certain ideology. One other issue is obviously surveillance. It's the biggest surveyor normally is the state. We know that from the UK quite a lot, but also from private people. You know as well as I do that a lot of videos which are shared online every day are videos about other people. So, you know, people take videos of what happens on the street, what their neighbors do, what their girlfriend does or their boyfriend does, etc. PP. And last but certainly not least, we have a long track record now about logging our entire life. There are fitness trackers, but there are all other ways of logging our life. And it's not only third parties doing this, like Facebook, but it's also us who contribute happily to providing data to all sorts of companies and all sorts of people. So while digitalization certainly has a lot of benefits, and I do believe in digitalization as the way forward for this planet, I think there is a distinct dark side of the moon, which is undisputable. The question really is, next slide, please. The question really is, what do we do with it? And this is a question we really asked, being Swisscom. We felt, and I personally do feel, that people are uncomfortable, and I think one part that they are uncomfortable is that legislation can't do it. Legislation can't do away with this anxiety for many reasons, but one more important reason really is that legislation is simply too slow. The speed, how these issues arise, is so big that legislation is far beyond, and the complexity, in addition to the speed, it's getting more and more overwhelming for legislators who tend to simplify things. So really, when facing this anxiety of the individuals and the society, you actually need, for me, it's really mandatory. You need to move away from the law and face ethical issues. So the best definition I ever read about ethics is the one by Aldo Leopold, who said ethical behavior is doing the right thing when no one else is watching, even when you're doing the wrong thing is legal. So I think what is really important for us in Swisscom, that ethics starts where legal stops. Achieving compliance, data protection compliance, as Vincent nicely put, is the baseline. Achieving legal compliance is not negotiable, and this is something everyone has to do, and also we have to do. So that's clear. However, we are convinced that we need to move beyond of the law, because there are certain things which could be legal, but still cannot be understood by the public, cannot be understood by the customers. And therefore, we need to take that feeling serious. And we believe that digital ethics is the answer to this. So what do we do in particular? We started off a half-year process of trying to define those principles of ethics which are meaningful to us. And as you know, ethics is not a science, and certainly not a mathematical science, but it actually is about values you want to pursue. And some values are fairly objective, like the human rights, but other values are individual. And so as a company, you need to choose those values which are relevant to your business, which are relevant to what you're doing. For instance, just to give you a flavor of that, talking about weapons and automated weapons, and not selling any automatic weapons is for Swisscom not really relevant, because we simply don't do with weapons. However, we have a lot of data because of the services we provide, and therefore these ethical principles apply to our business. So one of them is transparency. And when I say transparency, what I really mean is that we go beyond of what the law asks us to do. You know as well as I do that a lot of privacy policies we are facing in our everyday life are pretty let's say hazy. They don't really tell you what they do. They give you a certain hint of what they do, but there is a lot of interpretation involved there. So we want to go beyond that and really provide transparency, which is what it's actually supposed to be, namely transparent. Then one thing is privacy. We need to protect. Sorry, you can stay one back, please, Sebastian. Thank you. We need to provide privacy to the people. You know, our life has come very, very see-through because of digitalization, and we need to preserve the privacy. I think this is really important. We need to provide people a choice. The law, as you may know, especially the Swiss law, not so much a GDPR, but the Swiss data protection law, even in its new version, does not ask for consent for most of the data processings you use in a daily business life. So this said, we really want to provide more choice, and we want to provide the choice even if the law does not ask us to do that. We want to avoid any form of discrimination. regardless of what kind of discrimination is. Obviously, discrimination of sex and age, etc., is one of the key points, but there are also other ways of discrimination we want to absolutely avoid. We want to be responsible of what we do. So that means we need to organize ourselves. We need to be able to explain our decisions, and we need to communicate about this. And last but certainly not least, we want to provide customer value. I think from a digital ethical point of view, it's not a good choice to use methods of data processing or artificial intelligence which mainly benefit the company. We need to find ways of providing customer value to our customers and to society as a whole. And we need to be prepared to take workarounds to achieve that, even if it costs us more, or in extreme, it lets us to not achieve certain things we would like to achieve otherwise. And while all these principles are good to talk in an abstract, in the end, you need a concrete framework to put that to life. This framework really needs it needs processes. You need to have a clear process to know what happens when and who's responsible for that. You need to train people. You need to tell them what ethics is all about. And you will not be surprised that for many of our employees, this field is completely new. Obviously, ethics has been around for many centuries and even millenniums. However, for most of the people in our country, this is still a very, very new topic, and it's also an abstract topic. So you need to slowly guide them to understand what is expected from them. You need to have a board. You need to have some sort of body who decides on cases which are difficult, which need a decision. You need to communicate, and last but certainly not least, you need tools. You need tools to put to the fingertips of the employees, of the people who work with AI, who work with data on a daily basis, so they can actually get to the right point without having too much to spend of their time. You know, time is a very scarce resource for all of us, and so tool is basically the answer to make sure that they can think what they should think with investing a minimum of time. On an experience side, as I said, we've been using this framework since a year now. We had roughly about 10 cases so far, and it was really, really interesting to see what happens. First of all, the framework was extremely well received by the company, by the employees, and even more so by the senior management and the CEO. So we felt a lot of support for it, which was surprising. And the decisions we had by the board so far, they were actually rather on the strict side. I was expecting that the board would be, say, let's more lenient because maybe more business orientated, but in fact the other way was true. They were really strict, and they wanted to have a high degree of certainty that a certain use case was complying to our principles before they actually said it would be okay. So this is a journey. We only started. We are currently working on AI principles. So we have the general framework, which is basically the overarching fundamental principles. And then we work on AI principles to concretize the principles for the specificities of AI. And what we're also working right now to the end of the year is actually entering into a general communication to start the journey for the employees of our company. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolas. You've heard Vincent Kaufmann's expectations, the 7 expectations. Were they shocking for you or exaggerated, or you think, oh, that's easy peasy, we can fulfill them easily?
Neither of the above. I think they're pretty much what we do. Some of the things are required by the GDPR, especially on the data protection side. So having a risk management, having a data privacy management, looking for transparency, etc. So this is something you have to do under the GDPR anyway. So I'm briefly checking. Vincent also said. Obviously, AI needs to be useful, needs to take care of risks and threats to the society as such. Now, this is also for Swisscom. I mean, we do use certain AI, but it's let's say quite moderate for the time being. I think one needs to understand that you need a high degree of knowledge and a high degree of skills to really go deep into AI and to develop complex activities. So we're not that far yet. I mean, we're on the way, but our AI is, let's say, in a rather small place for the time being. So the risks are not that much. But we need to be prepared because it will pick up, and we're working on that, as I already mentioned. So long story short, I think we are pretty much aligned with what Sebastian put to us today and with the 7 expectations.
What would be the most challenging part? Is there something?
I think the most challenging part probably is the business perspective. As trees tend not to grow into heaven, as we say in German. And especially for us, if you carefully watch the news every year, our market is extremely competitive, has become extremely competitive, and our financial side is, let's say, challenging. So we need to make sure that we achieve what we want to achieve, and at the same time, reduce the resources we use. And so the more expectations to define to a company, and especially ours, the more difficult it gets really to satisfy everyone and all the expectations. So really trying to find the balance between surviving as a company, having a sound financial side, and moving ahead. That's certainly a challenge.
I was, of course, curious about your examples and the cases you mentioned, the 10 cases, but maybe we can talk about it later. I want to open the digital stage now to other digital ethics expert now. For example, with Cornelia Diethelm, we're very happy to have her here. She's one of the digital ethics pioneers in Switzerland. She launched the first digital ethics CAS in Switzerland at HWZ in Zurich. She is the CEO of the Shifting Society and founder of the digital ethics conference Shift. And she is member of the Ethos Foundation board. She's also a very passionate Twitterer. You can follow her there. You won't miss a thing about digital ethics. And how are you doing, Cornelia?
Thank you, I'm fine.
And we also welcome Jean-Henri Morin. He is joining us too. He's an associate professor of information systems at the University of Geneva. He's the president of Think Services, a Geneva-based think and do tank. And his research is actually focusing on digital rights management in enterprise and media sectors. And besides that, he's a confessing geek. I'm glad that he has answered my mails because so far he's got 150,681 unread emails as of today, and thinks email is the worst torture instrument ever designed and unquestioned since 1971. So he's very concerned about personal data, but not paranoid. Right, Jean-Henri?
That's correct, yes, absolutely. Over 150,000 unread emails in my various mailbox.
How can you live with that? How can you sleep?
I don't know. Yeah, just don't ask.
But you're alive, we see that. And last but not least, we would like to welcome Eva Thelisson. And she has an impressive double background. She's got a PhD in law and economy, and that's enabling her to understand both viewpoints, for example, of the economic actors, and on the other side, of the regulators. And actually, she uses personally less is more digital strategy, and she's using DuckDuckGo and ProtonMail on a daily basis. So I just want to do a short digital warm-up with you guys, and maybe someone is hungry. Who would like to have a cookie? Just please accept that. It will enhance your digital experience, and it will be so satisfying if you take these cookies. Do you want to have a session cookie, a personalization cookie? You want to have a tracking cookie, or do you want to have a third-party cookie? I mean, come on, how do you handle personally this cookie madness? Maybe Jean-Henri? So, unmute your microphone. Yeah, great.
Yeah. In other words, you're asking us how would we like our digital future to be served, right? Well, eventually, I think the point here, and is something I've been very keen about for many years now, is try to find a common ground where there is space for a debate and where the society basically is able to determine for itself where it wants to go and not to be fed with what an industry eventually is trying to promote and sell. And I mean, you have to witness to some extent that the world we live in today is basically a world where people, to some extent, live in a form of bliss and ignorance. Public policies are lagging behind, definitely, and while we've already talked a lot with Nicolas in the past on these topics.
Maybe I just don't want to go too deep into it. If it's just more like an opening question, maybe Cornelia.
Okay.
I mean, just how do you handle these cookies? I mean, it's quite annoying. It's kind of madness. It's not regulated.
It's very annoying, and it's the perfect example that it's so hard to regulate something. So there's a need to regulate, but when you have a regulation, you can see that it's not perfect. Maybe you have the contrary effect that you always click it away. There's no consent. You don't agree. It's just annoying. So that's really an example how strongly we depend on companies on a meaningful on a responsible behavior. We cannot wait to regulate things. That doesn't work.
Eva Thelisson, what do you think? Why do this cookie debate matter, or why does this cookie debate matter?
Yeah, on one hand, I mean, we all can know that since the GDPR implementation, so since the 20th of May 2018, many websites are much more transparent. So now we have the possibility to see what kind of cookies are used, and we also can choose the preferences. So we can, as a user, decide to give up our privacy, to get personalized services, or to improve our privacy in selecting some cookies. So I think it's much better because on one end, we have more transparency, but it's true that for many people, for many users, it's an additional burden because they receive, many pop-up notice and to ask them to decide. And when we always have to make decision on consent, on cookies, I mean, it's very tiring at the end of the day when you open in a digital society 100 or 1,000 websites per day. So it's not a black or white answer. It's true that transparency has many benefits, but it has also some costs for users. And I decide to have a very positive mind on that because at least now the user can know precisely what are the practice of some companies and as a control, a much better control on the cookies so that tracks them.
But I guess a minority is really clicking through all the options, I guess. Maybe Cornelia, you always look at the figures. I think it's a very small percentage.
Always, yes. The whole day I'm looking for these cookies. Yes, no. It's a little bit like social responsibility. I think you cannot always depend on the consent of the people. You have to make sure what can you do as a consumer and what is the responsibility for companies. Not everything is on our side, I guess.
Can be delegated to the user and consumer. Right. Mm-hmm. I would like to structure the debate into two parts. Just to start with the challenges and problems of digital responsibility, or talk about the digital irresponsibilities, just to make clear why we are discussing that topic. And on the second part, I would like to focus on the solutions. And you have a lot of concepts here as well, and we will look at it as well. So what do you think on a scale from 1 to 10, how digitally ethically responsible are the SMI companies, the blue chips, the 20 biggest corporations in Switzerland? Swisscom is included, of course. We remember pharmaceuticals like Novartis are included, banks are included. What would you say on a scale from 1 to 10? Who wants to give a try? Let's ask Nicolas from Swisscom.
I think that's a hard question.
That's why I'm asking. So you can say Swisscom has this score.
Because there is no such thing as I am ethical or not. It really depends about what values you're talking about, right? So I think, and this is really a wild guess, because I don't want to, not to answer your question. I think in Switzerland we have a fairly high ethical standard. At least how I see it, our society is still very much trying to make sure that no one is left behind, that we don't take advantage of weak people. However, I also do see that this has probably changed to the worse in the last few years. But I think it's still, let's say, to give it maybe a 7.
7, a positive view, maybe. Jean-Henri, do you share this positive view on a scale?
He never shares the views I have.
That's true, Nicolas. We debated about this already before. I would not go into the direction of a positioning a value on your question, because I think it's not a question of positioning ourselves. I mean, the topic is so important for our society and the future we want to give it, that we need to have a framework and a debate. I have no clue where companies, which are quoted on the SMI or large corporations in Switzerland would be, because I don't have access to them. So, and when you know what can happen in the background, I would have a tendency to agree with Nicolas on the fact that Switzerland might be a little bit more preserved than some other countries, but this, it's wishful thinking to some extent.
You mean like with money laundering in the past? No, I'm just joking. No, but so you wouldn't decide. You maybe go in the neutral way. You say it's a 5. So we are maybe on average in the middle.
Not even. Not even. I would really rebound on one of the things that was said before about transparency. And I think a lot of these issues have to do with transparency and accountability, consequently accountability.
Certainly, and obviously there is transparency is a big topic. What would you say? I mean, Cornelia, you work together with a lot of companies. You have a lot of insights in these companies. Are we on a good track? Are we above average? Are we some kind of aware of all the ethical pitfalls in Switzerland, or are we lagging behind?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree that Swiss companies have strong values. We are in a democracy, and we have a lot of stakeholders. We know how to deal with stakeholder expectations. So there, I think we are mature. We have a lot of mature companies. But actually, I think that there's a lack of knowledge about technology. What can you do with technology, and why do we use them? I think that right now we have a lot of people that think, oh, let's do something with face recognition or with with artificial intelligence, and they are not talking about a problem we have to solve. They just like to do something with a technology, and that's very dangerous. And I think that a lot of people, they are not aware about the damage that they can do with this technology. And therefore, I think there's a need to have more knowledge about the chances and the risk about this technology to make meaningful decisions. So it needs some trainings. And therefore, I think digital responsibility is a very important topic, not only to care about compliance, innovation, digitalization, but to make sure that when we go in this direction, we have to take into account the ethical aspects of digitization. Yes, the good side and the bad side, to make responsible decisions about the future.
So it's not exactly a 7, it would be maybe a 6 in Switzerland.
I would say, yeah, 4 or 5, but
okay.
I think Swisscom is much higher rated. So for me, that's really a best in class right now. I think they are first mover. They are doing a great job, and that depends to people like Nicolas that care about such issues, and about the organization that gives a structure for that. Actually, I think it's a high motivation that Swisscom shows that we can do it. So it's not magic. We can be responsible and make money. I mean, that's fantastic.
So, but that's not the rule, maybe. So you say you're either 4 or 5. So Eva Thelisson, what do you think? So in the international comparison, where are we there? Do we have to go a long way to catch up with maybe more ethical countries or regulated markets, or are we done yet and have... Oh, we've just joined by another guest. I just welcome. Maybe it's one of our spectators.
Rudi Rechsteiner.
Yeah, Rudi, that's Rudi Rechsteiner. I haven't recognized you. He will join us afterwards. He's the chairman of Ethos Foundation. Welcome. Eva, so can we just go back to the scale? What would you say? Where are we?
Well, I fully concur with Jean-Henri Morin that it's difficult without data to have a precise, ranking. Where I really share the view of Cornelia that education is really central, and what we can see in Switzerland that the level of awareness of many companies is quite high now, perhaps because of some fines that have some, of course, scandal like Cambridge Analytica, Clearview, but also some fines that have been given to big players like Google, 50 millions, recently Marriott, and for 18 million, and also British Airways for data breaches. So, I mean, a lot of, noise have been made on this importance of, implementation of GDPR rules, on having ethical behaviors. So I think the level of awareness is quite high, but it's true that we still need, I think, much more education on the cost benefit, on the benefit of this technology, and but at large for all stakeholders, and also the risk of harm and misuse. And when I speak about all stakeholders, of course, I think about shareholders, the general public, the employees, and the suppliers, having a holistic view of the companies. And I think it's only with this vision that we can really move forward. And therefore, the initiative of Ethos on digital responsibility is absolutely crucial, because it's really encompassing many different aspects on, of course, data management, ethics, oversight, environmental costs, etc. And we will talk about that later. But I don't want to give a precise ranking.
Yeah, of course. That's more like a gut feeling where we are standing. I mean, and who shall I ask if not you, because you're in these ethical responsibility topics. And I would say thank you very much for these bold guesses. And so we have between 4 and 7 in Switzerland to have a start. And let's now talk about the digital irresponsibilities we've mentioned before, because we have to really know why we talk about this. Maybe we can talk about a few cases. Jean-Henri Morin, I give the word to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe I can share just a couple of slides here. I want to show you a picture. Okay.
Yeah, let's give it a try to illustrate maybe a case.
Does that work?
Not yet. Yeah.
Eventually.
Maybe you have to tell us and explain us the case.
I think I can't share. I don't have the rights. That's a security problem.
I'm sorry. Director.
So anyway, I'll post to Twitter the picture later. But basically, what I wanted to show you is a huge complex, which is 1,100,000 square meters, 26 buildings, which has cost $4.3 billion, and which is hosting 24,000 research and development employees. And this building, I don't know if anybody knows where it is, but that's why I wanted to show the picture. It's basically the LG Science Park that was inaugurated 2 years ago. And the thing is, and it's a pity we don't have the slide, but that's okay. If you look at the website of LG Science Park, basically what you can read there is LG will chart the right future for mankind. Now, why is a private company entitled to say that they know the right future and even more for mankind? Okay. And when the first time I saw this was last year, I was at a conference in Seoul, and one of the presenters was presenting this science park, and claiming that 2019 is a big year because we're putting the human in the center of the picture. And I could not help asking him the question, okay, if this is the case, how many, basically how many sociologists, how many ethicists, how many anthropologists do you have among those 24,000 R&D employees? And the answer was strikingly silent. And from that point on, I thought, if you're looking at a major global company, in electronics, but not only, this is a chaebol, it's a Korean conglomerate. Everybody knows the brand LG. Everybody carries something from LG, and you get this feeling, this very frightening feeling that they will be crafting the right future for mankind. So I like this example because it's not the traditional GAFAM example. We've been bashing a lot. Of course, this doesn't mean that what they're doing is any better, but this is another, from the other side, from another culture point of view. And I think we should be overly cautious nowadays just to overlook what is happening by those corporations. Now, and it boils down to the question I was asking before, what information society do we want to live in? And the major problem in the background of that is, and I'll finish with these two statements here, I've watched the Social Dilemma movie recently that came out on Netflix, and the thing is, they're basically claiming that the root cause of all the problems of the world is social networks. No, it's not. I mean, it's one among many. We have many more problems, but the real root problem that we have from a digital irresponsibility point of view is the business model. when you get the CEO of Netflix basically telling, publicly that his biggest enemy or competitor is sleep, what does this mean from a humanity point of view? Sleep is the most important thing that keeps us alive as people in the world. How on earth can you say that, sleep is your biggest competitor and enemy, and that to some extent you want to fight it? So this brings me to the last point I want to make here, is that to some extent there is economic cynicism that kind of prevails from an industrial standpoint. And I'm afraid to say, but without questioning the business model, which works very well for them, we could very well call them too fat to change, by analogy with the too big to fail of the financial crisis of 2008. There are many more horror stories that we could talk about. I mean, some other people, mentioned, Vincent mentioned a few. I mean, I could spend hours, describing horror stories, but I think it's not the point.
No, but it gives a good overview. It's a bit is Jean-Henri Morin Mr. Doom, or do you see it as big dangers as well, Nicolas Passadelis, from the?
I think he's got a very valid point. Really, I think the problem really is there's so many horror stories and threats and risks that you don't know really where to start. But what I can say, obviously, I'm not positioned as well as Jean-Henri is to have an extremely general opinion. He's a professor, I'm a lawyer. However, what I can say is how we do that. And we had the discussion already about 4 years ago about what do we want to do with data. So the catchword is data strategy. And obviously, we will not change our business model because we are a telecom and IT service provider, so that's kind of fixed. However, what we came to a conclusion was that we use data primarily for two things. First is to be more efficient in what we do. And the second is to provide more value to our customers with data. So that's the two key points. And only a very minor point in this concert is to have new business model in case one comes along where we could use data. However, this is really not something we believe in, and it's not pushed on a strategic level. But the first two, they are pushed. And so, for instance, I can say one example about myself. I am faced as the head of data governance. I'm faced with the 11 billion undertaking and 17,000 employees, and they all need to comply with data protection. So how do you achieve that? Obviously, I could have a team of 3,000 people who teaches them on a daily basis and goes there and does consulting, etc. pp. Unfortunately, although I would love to have a team of 3,000, I have a team of 3. So how do we do that with 3? The answer is automation. So we use data, we use electronic data, we use tools and digitalization to automate what we would do in person if we had the resources to do it. So we actually increase our efficiency with a team of 4 in total to advise administrators of software applications, of network engineers, of human resource people automatically with the software, which I think is pretty unique in Europe and maybe even on a worldwide level, automatically about what they're supposed to do and what they don't supposed to do. And as on a very actual figure, which I checked this week, we have done 500 assessments of software applications with that tool we developed, which is probably half of what we have so far. And we are going, so we will be probably almost 80% by the end of next year. And this is absolutely unique. I don't know any company which is even close to having checked 50% of all its software applications on data protection and privacy by design. So this is what we use data for.
And that's already a bit of the solution part from the second part, but maybe just to stick to the problems and challenges, you mentioned 10 cases you had to discuss on the ethics board this year. And which one, did you have to stop one or more? And what was it about?
Yeah, we had a couple which we stopped, yes.
And what was it about?
It was the idea that we could analyze employee data for purposes which we thought were not in line with our principles. So the purposes were more on an efficiency level or on a cost-cutting level. So the goal was basically to be more commercially efficient and to cut costs. However, the employee data is not there to be analyzed just for cost-cutting, especially not on an individual basis. We are pretty relaxed when we do analysis of employee data which are aggregate and anonymous. So, for instance, when we are facing the question, how good or how badly are our premises used? Obviously, we have hundreds of premises we use for daily work, and not all of them are used in the same way or as intensively as others are. So we use, for instance, technology to find out, how many people are really in the building on what weekdays, and how do they spread within the building. But we do that anonymously so we can derive our conclusions. So that's okay, but doing this on an individual level for whatever purpose is not okay. So we have to stop those cases.
So Cornelia, how does this sound for you, and which kind of digital irresponsibilities bother you the most?
Yeah, I think it's a great example, because this move to be more efficient, that is a little bit the cause why sometimes we have unethical applications, because we think you can do everything more efficient, but actually it's about values, it's about effectiveness, and especially when we care about the employees. Maybe the company thinks, oh, it makes it more efficient, but people, they are afraid. They think, oh, I will lose my job. They will control me. So it's not always about the figures. It's always about the emotions, about expectations, and therefore this stratification, especially at the workplace, is a very sensitive issue. I think if it makes really sense, you should involve the employees to make sure that they are, that they think it's a good idea, and that they can that it's transparent what for. And close to that, I think if we talk about unethical decision, there's a huge lack of diversity. I mean, a lot of these companies, like Jean already said, it's made by white men with a good education, but it's not really our society. Our society is much more diverse, and that's very important. When we use technologies for good, we have to make sure that the whole diversity of our society is part of that, especially when we create new applications, that we have enough diversity to involve consumers, to involve different genders, ages, different disciplines, from psychology and not only from engineering. That's very important when we talk about data, algorithms, and artificial intelligence.
So you kind of fear discriminating algorithms the most. Eva Thelisson, maybe the last question for this section on the problem side, more challenges. Do you think that Corona really actually made this discussion even more urgent? I mean, Vincent, for example, pointed out that pharmaceutical companies in the healthcare sector, they use now more personalized medicine and tracking instrument, tracing instrument. What do you think?
Yes, definitely COVID-19 was a catalyst. So the level of awareness of the people just increased, that we, both sides, I mean, that the digitalization was really a fantastic tool to continue the business activity. I mean, we are all happy today, to have this conference online. Many companies just continue working online. So this is also the consequences of digitalization. But of course, the question of privacy, of the use of data in a responsible manner was much more questionable during the pandemic. At the same time, for healthcare, data is becoming a very strategic asset. I mean, if you want to minimize false positive, and you need a certain amount of data. So it is also a difficult question. But just to come back on Jean-Henri Morin's point, I think it was a very important point, the attention economy and the addiction by design, I would say, with the example of Netflix, to maximize the time we spend on applications. This is a fundamental issue. So the question of the business models that are chosen by the companies. And the value of Ethos recommendation today is really to try to align the interests of all stakeholders and to engage all companies in business models that are responsible, I mean, eco-responsible, human-centered, and performant at the same time. Because, it's not ethical, I mean, to continue like that. And I think it can be a competitive advantage for company to really publish how good they are in this field and to have an oversight on the management board on this issue. And regarding the anonymous data, when Nicolas Passadelis spoke about that, there are a lot of research done by Eva Alexandre de Montjoie in Imperial College in London, and he managed to demonstrate that you can infer many information and re-identify many data, combining data that are anonymized. So, I mean, anonymization is not working in practice because we have such a huge computation power in some companies that with machine learning now you can re-identify some people, even with millions of data points. So I think we don't have enough debate on anonymization. And this is a central question. Because first, when you anonymize the data protection regulation is not applicable. And secondly, you can infer many information. For example, you can infer health information, just combining many data that are non-sensitive, like number of steps of the people, like their habits and their job and where they are located, etc. And then you can what they drink, what they eat, and then you can infer information. So I think the question of anonymization of data and profiling in general is a central one. And last one, but not least, is the environmental cost of digitalization. When you have computation power, when you use machine learning, you need space, you need energy, you need data center, you need water to cool down the server. So I think this is a fundamental question to monitor and to evaluate the cost of this digitalization for companies. And it will become more and more important to demonstrate their positive footprint, I would say.
Yeah, and we often forget to talk about these topics when it comes to digital responsibility, which is a look at the common criticism and not to the environmental cost, for example. It's a wide field. We've talked a lot about the problems. Maybe we open up the discussion. Are there any questions popping up from the audience? I'm sure there are some. They're very active community.
Yeah,
here.
The community is very active. We see we have some digitalization experts, but many comments rather than question, I must say. Yeah, I think it's more about general question, comment we have in the chat room. One question may be more related to our expectation. Who would certify the good application of ethical principle, like the one from Ethos by a company? Does it need something like an ISO certificate? Who would do the positive storytelling of AI so the public will lose their predominant fears? I think this is a good question, and maybe Eva could tackle on the point as a transition. Who should certify?
Yeah, and yeah, I mean, you have a special concept, I guess, also who could help in this direction.
Mm-hmm. No, this is a fundamental question. So there are different models that could be used. So first, you could have, you need an independent body, so to avoid conflict of interest. So that is one thing. So it could be a public organization, or it could be a private organization, but then you have to ensure that this organization is non-profit, is a public utility, etc., to avoid conflict of interest. But it's true that when you look at the business model of rating companies today, they are not exempt from conflict of interest. And the history shows as well that some audit companies and merging consulting companies were also at risk. So I think the good certification model would be a business model from with an organization that is independent, that is non-profit and public utility, and that can bring this transparency.
You've been part of the OECD working group on AI principles. Do we have some kind of chance of a global framework here?
So at the moment, many things are going on actually. So on 20th of October, the European Parliament first took a resolution on liability, civil liability. So I think it was a very important first step. OECD, of course, at this AI principles, have many working groups on AI trustworthiness, but as well, very important initiative is from the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is drafting at the moment a paper to prepare an international convention on artificial intelligence governance, on AI governance, to ensure that the rule of law, the democracy, and the human rights are really implemented by the state. So, like, the state have a positive responsibility to act, to contribute, and to ensure that some basic principles and rights are really concretely implemented, and that legal remedy are effective in this state. And I think we are part of this initiative at the Council of Europe, and we are really enthusiastic and thrilled about this text because of COVID-19, people are all working remotely and very efficiently as a network, and I think this will bring a lot of benefit at international level, a bit like the Convention 108 Plus, that is a legally binding instrument on AI, and which will try, I think, with the Council of Europe to combine legally binding instrument with soft law mechanism, both that are approved by competent authority, public competent authority, with a similar framework as the GDPR. So the economic actors can use certification, seals, code of conduct to demonstrate that they behave in a responsible way. But I think it will not be sufficient. The European Parliament, in its text, I mean, from 20th of October, just states that even if a company can demonstrate that it behaves in a responsible manner, it will remain liable. So in the event of a damage. So, and also in the text, really is very clear that there is no delegation of liability, even if a decision is made by an autonomized algorithm. So
we are in the middle of the chances part, and you say a lot of it is going on, but it's not sufficient. And Jean-Marie, Morin, anyway, is it possible somehow to protect individual data rights and make it collectively useful, or is this just an utopia, or what do you think?
I think the key question here is the business model. So if we change the business model and we enter into I would say an interaction where data is not, as everybody says today, the new oil, but we start talking about data use, and it's very fundamentally different. I mean, if you look at the business model today, the data is at the center part of the business model. If we look at data use from that point of view, then it completely changes the business model, because from there on you can engage into a different kind of user experience and business interaction, offering the opportunity for people to consider their data or data in general as as something which is theirs, like you would have an arm, a leg, or a bone or something. You cannot commerce that, but we have to go to that level of maturity and to enter into this direction, I think.
So you say changing the business model. So you actually also say that it's good that we have monopoly cases now against Google, or just that they have to smash the companies?
Well, the puzzling fact is that never in the history of humanity have we had before 2.7 billion accounts active monthly in the hands of a private company, where people have put their most intimate information. We have an issue here. There's something that's not right, and something has to be done about it. Now, I don't know if it's antitrust, anti-competition, or whatever. I have no idea what should be done, but we have a problem here. So unless we're able to reverse the business model and to put back, the user, the person whose data is intrinsically at the center of his own autonomy and determination, that he can express in a free and an informed and consent-given way, we're not going anywhere.
And actually,
I would like to skip in here. Sorry, Patrizia. Now we've been talking since a couple of hours now about all the negative aspects of technology and what has to be done, and there's a myriad of expectations and things to do, regulation, etc., which is discussed to be imposed on businesses. However, two things. First of all, technology is not necessarily a bad thing in itself. I'm just taking the Google example now because Jean-Henri just talked about it. Google, and especially the search machine, but also the other services, they had a tremendous benefit to society as well. And the second point I want to mention is it's probably quite easy to talk about the big guys and the big companies out there, with good reasons, right? Because they cause most of the problems. They have the resources to fix them. You have enough power to talk to them, etc. However, talking about responsibility, we also need to focus on two things. First of all is, how do we balance risks, threats to benefits? So I think this is extremely important, because I'm completely convinced, especially as a society as Switzerland, where we have no other resources than knowledge, I think being at the forefront of digitalization will save us the welfare we all bank on. That's my personal conviction. I'm happy to be challenged on this, and I would be actually interested to know what challenges there could be. Secondly,
so you say we are too negative
data protection
here? And do you say
no,
also that the benefits outweigh the
let
damages?
me just make the second point.
Yeah, but it's a question regarding the benefits. You say the benefits, the technological benefits outweigh the damages of technology.
I say you need to balance them. You need to take into account. This is always what you have to do when you do risk assessments, is always managing risk versus benefits and finding the balance between threats and costs, which cost you to mitigate the threats and so on. There is no way. It's just there is no one side look on things. You always need to balance. And the second point I wanted to make is data protection has shown that actually quite nicely. Most of the data protection laws have been around since 1992. Most of the companies never cared about it. Now we have the GDPR and the new Data Protection Act. Most of the big companies will follow. Most of the small companies will have a big trouble to do that. just because of they don't have the resources, they don't have the know-how. So by defining solutions, I think one needs to take into account how effective can the solutions really be. I mean, you can define a solution or an expectation, say, well, this is what it should be. But what do you do if 80% of the companies will just not be able to follow it? So I think I would like to focus on balancing benefits and threats on the one hand, and also what solutions are really workable in practice.
Mm-hmm. That's, of course, a question also for Cornelia. I mean, what do we do next? What can we move on into practical and into business, that it's working, and that it's not just a theoretical construction?
Yeah, I think a strong force could be well-educated employees, because when they are in a field like data science, they are well paid, so there are not enough people who work in these new fields. So I believe that they could have strong values like a profession ethics, so that they say, I'd like to give my knowledge for something good and not for the bad or for the dark side. And so they can choose for which company they like to work. And I think that could, like the example of Google, that could be a strong voice in the future, that we have more responsibility. And the other part, I think we have to invest in digital skills for all of us, because when we are back to the cookies, there's a lot of things that are not bad, but we are afraid because we don't know enough. So we have to make sure that we concentrate on the real bad side, and that we use data in a good way. And therefore, I'm pretty sure that we have to invest in our data skills, that we know more about data, how to use them, what is the benefit for that. Yeah, not only the bad side, but to make sure that we are more independent. And sometimes we have maybe small decisions that we can take. And I'd like to be a person that have an informed choice, and therefore I need more information. And we should invest in the digital skills of all the people in our society. We have there a huge gap, I think.
So you strongly advocate data literacy. So we heard quite a lot of solutions. I mean, code of conduct, data literacy, and global framework on OECD level, on the level. We would like to open for the last time the discussion and take and have a look at your questions, if there are any, or if there are some comments.
Don't receive any further question right now.
Hopefully you've answered all the questions. Jean-Henri Morin wants to say, to add.
Maybe while Vincent is looking for an interesting choice in the list, just a comment. I'd like to rebound on what Nicolas said. I think it's very important, the balance between the benefits and the risk and threats. My feeling here is that it is precisely initiatives like the one which is carried by Ethos today which will start a conversation. It will start a debate. And that's the interesting point about such an initiative, because it's going to be, companies will have to think about it. And whether they're big or small, and I agree, again, implementing GDPR is not the same for a large multinational as it is for an SME. And most multinational companies actually implemented way before 2018, the deadline. They were compliant already before the deadline. So, but the small and medium-sized enterprises, yes, they need to be accompanied. And there's a lot of work to be done here. And we're working also on some approaches, also with Ethics Lab, on trying to build a service for that in the light of the work that was done before. And yeah, just wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's good. Hopeful words at the end. I don't know if a question popped up, or actually it's good to have hopeful words at the end and speak about real cookies again, and not the digital ones.
Oh, general comment about cookies, because it's under my... cookies are hard to regulate, just make tracking illegal. Done. Regulators have to stop pushing the burden on the users. This is a spectator anonymous comment. And I think this is quite the view we have from the audience, just to push more on the, a lot of doubts on the ability of self-regulation, I would say, of a big corporate. From the comment I can read.
And maybe just to sum up very quickly now, because actually we are completely over time now. What has to happen next to somehow push digital responsibility into mainstream like sustainability? So what has to happen next? Very quickly, what would be your wish list? Just start, Nicolas Passadelis, with you. What has to happen next?
I would follow what Jean-Henri said. It first needs to have a broad discussion, and will go on for a while. Then it has to go to sharing experiences, sharing ideas. What we do here, and what I personally do very frequently. And thirdly, I think what's really very close to my heart, it's tools. We need to have tools which are really available, easily accessible at a low cost, in order to spread the effect of what we're doing and all the thoughts we made. Because if we go on that you have to hire a lawyer to do that, it's simply not going to happen.
Thank you, Nicolas. Thank you, Jean-Henri. Eva, what would you like to happen next, that we can move on with this topic?
Well, I think we need to create economic incentive to align the interests of all stakeholders, to engage the companies in responsible business model. And therefore, Ethos recommendation now and initiative is very, very interesting. And the iTransparency Institute published 3 frameworks for good governance. One was prepared with Jean-Henri Morin, Ethics Lab, and Ethos. And the goal is really to assist the companies in designing products and services that are, responsible, and to assist them in complying with the Ethos now recommendation. And we are developing a platform, and we hope that we will be able to certify then the companies, so that we can reward responsible actors by the market. And also, I strongly believe in digital literacy and education as a complement, like Cornelia.
Thank you, Eva. Cornelia, you want to add something? You have the honor of last words.
Yes, it would be great to have such an offensive in data literacy in Switzerland. And second, there should be an obligation to inform in the annual report about digital responsibility, I think. Explain or complain, or I don't know how to spell that.
Comply or explain.
Exactly that way. And the third, I think it's very great to have examples like Swisscom, because they can show that there's not a divide between commercial success and run a business responsible. We need such examples, such best practices. That's very important.
Thank you so much, Cornelia. Thank you to all of you. That was time very well spent with you and it was an enlightening talk. I've learned a lot again. And I will hand over to our host now, the chairman of Ethos Foundation, Rudi Rechtscheiner.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And I would like to thank all the pertinent presentation and contribution. It was a very good discussion, and I learned a lot. I loved your plate with the cookies. They look so good. And it's a trap. So how can we prevent that we are trapped all against our personal freedom? That was an important aspect. I loved the saying, Swisscom representative that legislation is too slow. I learned this, and I learned also that compliance rules and liability is present, and it's done in Brussels. And I feel like Switzerland on a legislative level is much behind. And therefore, I'm very happy that Ethos now has an engagement paper to address companies themselves for self-regulation. And I also would like Mr. Morin and all the persons who contributed to this paper, because I think in this moment it's important that companies are responsible. We cannot maybe say today what is good or what is bad. I would like to hint that digitalization is shaping the economy. You take companies like Airbnb or Uber or Amazon or Booking.com, they are changing structures in the economy. And of course, there are victims and there are winners. And as an economist, I would like to point out that monopoles, monopolistic structure in general are not good. So I think that that's a duty for parliaments to keep good conduct mandatory, obligatory, I would like to say. And we have now an important night, you know. We have Trump against Biden tonight, and we know what happened 4 years ago, and we might all ask, will it be the same as 4 years ago, or will it be different? And we will find out over the next days. So I hope the right side will win. I don't say which one, but you all have an opinion and you know what I'm talking about. So I wish you a good night and a good morning, especially for tomorrow and the day after. And again, in the name of Ethos Foundation, it was a very interesting evening. Thank you all together. It was fascinating to listen to you.
Thank you. Thank you for your attention, and we wish you a very exciting night as well. And don't forget, don't accept cookies, eat them.
Okay.